So before we start, I wanted to just begin with our land acknowledgement. With great respect, Cal State LA acknowledges the Tongva people as the traditional caretakers of Tovangar, the Tongva world, including the Los Angeles Basin, South Channel Islands, San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys, and portions of Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. Cal State LA is located within these lands. As an institution located on unceded Tongva land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and our relatives, relations past, present, and emerging. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Cal State LA more accountable to the needs of American peoples, Indian peoples. Thank you. So welcome today. My name is Sasha Brown Rice. I am the executive director at the Pat Brown Institute. For those of you who don't know, the Pat Brown Institute is a nonpartisan institute here on the campus of Cal State LA. And we were founded by former California Governor Pat Brown. And we're dedicated to upholding his legacy by advancing inclusive and equitable public policy, convening community stakeholders on the vital issues of the day, and also by promoting civic engagement. And as one of the foundational aspects of civic engagement is being informed, we decided to offer this panel about media literacy, information, misinformation, disinformation, and how to navigate that. That is such a challenge today. So luckily we have a fantastic panel and a wonderful moderator who I will introduce, and then she will introduce the panel. I also want to welcome all of our folks online. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the panel, so feel free to add those questions to the chat. Our moderator is none other than Julie Patel-Liss, and Professor Liss heads up the journalism department here on campus, and she is also an Emmy Award-winning journalist, and we're so grateful for her to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for spending your morning with us. This should be a fun event. So I have some slides that I wanted to share with you before we get started, just so we sort of have a foundation of similar knowledge. One of them is talking about misinformation and disinformation. Oh, there we are. Okay. So this is what we're going to actually be talking about today, becoming a verification ninja, okay? And that means that there's lots of information that's thrown at us from social media, from different websites, from blogs, from our television sets, from our mobile devices, right? And how do we discern what is information that is actually accurate and credible and reliable versus information that's going to lead us astray, right? That's going to have us make the wrong decisions about our lives, about public policy. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And I have a few quick little tips, but first I want to talk about what is misinformation, disinformation, and artificial intelligence. Has anybody heard of misinformation? Does anybody know what misinformation is and the difference between misinformation versus disinformation? Okay, Braxton, you had a thought? No? Okay. All right. Does anyone want to has anybody, raise your hand if you've heard of misinformation, even if you don't quite know how to define it. Okay. Raise your hand if you've heard of disinformation, even if you don't quite know how to define it, okay? What about AI, artificial intelligence? This is a big technology that's going to affect all of our lives. It already is. So we'll talk about that, and then a few quick online tools to check, to verify, basically, to figure out the date that something was there, the place, and other information. So we talked about misinformation. Misinformation is unintentionally, this is like typos or unintentional mistakes that then get circulated and end up perpetuating wrong information, right? And so sometimes a caption on a photo will be wrong, or a source will be incorrect. And it was just, usually it's sloppiness on the part of the reporter or the person gathering that information, okay? That's misinformation. It's not on purpose. It's unintentional, okay, misinformation. Or there's one more example, actually, of misinformation. When somebody takes satire seriously. What's an example of satire? Does anybody watch any television shows that are meant to be satirical? Braxton? Okay, it's a joke, right? And even better, The Office, yeah, there is a lot of satire or irony used in The Office, that type of humor. But if anybody watches This Week with John Oliver, or, you know, the shows like that, those are, or has anybody, raise your hand if you've heard of The Onion. Okay, that's satirical, right? It's not real, but if you take it seriously, that's misinformation. Disinformation is fabricated and deliberately manipulated information to deceive somebody. Does that make sense? Intentionally deceive somebody with bad information, okay? And then malinformation is a little bit different. That's deliberate publication of private information for revengeful reasons, for corporate reasons, or vengeful reasons, or for profit reasons. So there's 3 different types of misinformation: falseness, intent to harm. And just to give you a few quick, we already talked about satire and parody. That's unintentional, right? Okay? When headlines, visuals, or captions don't support the content, what is that called? When the headline isn't actually what the story's about? There's a word for that. Does anybody know the word? Huh? Clickbait, right? So clickbait is another unintentional, perhaps unintentional, it just doesn't support the content, right? You think you're going to get one thing, but it's not the same thing. Misleading content, imposter content, fabricated content, manipulated content now is meant to, is that unintentional if you're manipulating your content? No, it's not unintentional. It's on purpose. You're actually trying to deceive. So those are the types of misinformation, information disorders are called. Artificial intelligence. Raise your hand if you can kind of briefly summarize what you think artificial intelligence is. Or give me an example of it. It involves computer science, yes, but what does it do that's different from regular coding or regular computer science? Do you know? Does anybody know? I think I saw a hand over there.
It's computer-generated information.
Computer-generated information, and what were you going to say? Okay, so maybe they're using knowledge in order to perform tasks, simulate human beings, right? Simulate the type of reasoning we apply. And so examples would be, raise your hand if you've heard of ChatGPT, right? Or, and it's very basic. There's a few different types of AI. Most of you have encountered narrow AI. So that's designed for specific tasks. So for instance, if you're using a chatbot, right? And they're answering questions for you, the way they answer those questions is they have a lot of data, a lot of information about the kinds of questions people normally ask and the types of answers for the different questions. Does that make sense? Depending on the person's response. So you can use it to ID plants. I don't know if you've ever used that, if anybody has a smartphone, where you can click on the info and it'll identify the plant type, or even cats and dogs. It can identify the breed of dog. So one type of narrow AI is called generative AI. Raise your hand if you've heard of generative AI. Okay, generative AI is kind of what it sounds like, right? It generates content. It's looking at these patterns, it's analyzing these patterns, drawing conclusions, and then applying them and creating content. It can create music lyrics, music itself, videos, text. It can fix glitches on computer code. It can translate languages. It can answer questions. So there's a lot that it can do just because it has lots of information about our world, right? About these specific tasks that it's going to do. Strong AI is AI that understands, learns, and applies knowledge across a range of tasks. So it's not just doing one thing, like answering a question or identifying a plant, but it's doing a bunch of things at once. Super AI surpasses human intelligence. We're not even there yet. Okay, this is not something that exists yet. But this is the kind of thing that you'll see in science fiction movies, right? Something that could happen in the future, where it surpasses human intelligence, dipping into things like self-improvement, self-awareness, that kind of thing, okay? So now that we kind of know that, I'd like you to do one quick activity before we get started. Do we have time for this activity, though? Let me just talk to our Pat Braun folks. Yeah? Okay. So the way to tell, so first of all, pay attention to these ways of identifying if something is fake and how to verify information. Then you're going to apply it to a quick activity, okay? You're going to look something up for me. All right. So one thing you want to do, obviously, is carefully observe. You know, is anything askew? Does something look blurry? Was something cut off? Were words chopped off or something? Does something look photoshopped, right? Check the original source of your images or website. So raise your hand if you've ever used Google reverse image search or Google Lens, right? So you can take a photo and you can search for the original source using Google Lens or Google reverse image search or TinEye. You can also find the original source of websites at places like whois.com, which basically shows you who owns a website, when it was created, the address, all that kind of stuff. Web Archive is a way to see old websites that have been taken down. But if you have the link, you can find them. And then finally, there are other news sources, and others have already fact-checked some of the stuff. So you should always go and check credible news outlets, you know, like the CNNs or the LA Times or the New York Times or those types of outlets. And then there are some specific fact-checking sites called Snopes, PolitiFact, and factcheck.org as well, on top of the news sites you can go to. Okay, so this is kind of how Google reverse image search works. You put the photo, you Google reverse image search, then it shows up with a little search bar, and you can drop the photo right in there, okay, or a link to the photo. And then it'll show you all the different instances of where the photo was. All right, so you're going to choose one quick example, each one of you. If you want to work with a pair, that's fine too. Then you're going to spend a few minutes looking online, sleuthing online, okay? Using those 3 tools that we discussed, right? Observing, using the Google reverse image search, blah, blah, blah. And you only have 3 minutes for this because we want to move to the panel. So just pick one of these links. And if you do not have a phone with you, please partner with somebody who has a phone with them, okay? And if you look around, if you have a phone and the people around you do not have a phone, please discuss with them and work with them. So just pick one. All right, time's up. The first one is a photo of a girl in a boat with a puppy, right? Raise your hand if you learned something about this photo. If you're a news outlet and you want to run this photo, what are the questions you're going to ask? What are you going to think about? Or did you find something that's going to dissuade you from doing this? Raise your hand if you'd like to chime in about this one. Who did? Raise your hand if you looked at this photo, the girl with the puppy photo. This is actually very recently in the news. Okay. Does anybody want to tell me what you found out about this photo? And how?
I feel like it's artificial intelligence because it looks too smooth. It looks too perfect.
Too smooth, too perfect. Okay. So did you Google this? Did you do Google reverse image search or Google it? And what did you find if you Googled it or Google reverse image searched it? Did anybody have time to do that? What did you find out about this? Okay, after Hurricane Helene, it was a deep fake AI generated photo. And it's interesting, there were some news stories written about it because it went viral and people were sharing photos about it saying, basically criticizing the Democrats and saying, wow, FEMA's only going to give $750. And, there were a lot of other rumors that were circulating as well, but this is one of them. And this photo went viral. I mean, at first glance, it looks like, oh my God, that photographer captured an amazing photo, right? A news photo. But no, it's not true, okay? Fake news. Great job. Okay, the next one. Who did the USC prof? Oh, and you can see that some of the posts actually on Twitter, so here's the first one. Let me go back. That's one of them that doesn't have this disclaimer, but some of them actually now have a disclaimer on them. Somebody flagged it, readers flagged it, and now it says this AI-generated image. But you can see how widely it was shared. How widely was this shared? How many views did it get? Can anyone see that? A lot, right? 44,000. Okay. How about the next one? Did anybody raise your hand if you looked at the USC professor example? Okay. And in that example, was there anything that that you thought was questionable? Or did you do Google reverse image search? No? Okay. Did anybody else do Google reverse image search of that video? No? Okay, well, it turns out that it was a very viral video. Let me go back one. It was another viral video, got many, many views, if you look at the original link I sent you. However, you can notice that there's like blurriness, there are words cut off, and it turns out that the 5-second video was widely shared of the professor saying everyone, this was at a pro-Palestinian protest, the USC professor said everyone should be killed. And so the USC Annenberg, the student newspaper, wrote about that. There was calls to fire him. He did get put on administrative leave. But then finally somebody put out a whole 20-second video, the full video, and the full video showed that he had said, Hamas are murderers, everyone should be killed. So they took it out of context. Okay, does that make sense? So it got cut in a way that got him basically put on administrative leave, suspended. So you can see how this actually affects people's lives, right? These things. And it can sway elections. I mean, if people shared the Kamala Harris one, they shared it way more than the correction. People might say, oh, Kamala Harris would not make a good president because she's only giving $750 and this is so sad, right? And so it can actually change elections as well as cost people their jobs. So we're going to go to the panel now. I just wanted to do a quick plug. Sasha said that I could plug our UT Community News Voter Guide. So if you, it's all around campus. It's in the next 2 issues of the University Times and in the previous 2 issues of the University Times. And it's also online at this website. And actually, if members of the class who produced this can stand up, let's give you guys a quick round of applause. Yay. And we have some special guests from Dorsey High School here. Can you and your advisors, your teachers stand up? The Dorsey students too, please. All right, welcome to Cal State LA. All right. Okay, so let's move to the panel now. We have an esteemed group of journalists and entrepreneurs here. And we'll start with Martin Albornoz, who is general manager at Galo News. Most recently, Martin was general manager of REM Communications, managing over 20 newspapers and websites across the Southwest. He was also publisher of several wine tourism magazines in Napa, Sonoma, and the Central Coast. He's worked on the digital teams at the OC Register, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and Southland Publishing. He helped launch LA Forward, which is a pioneering public media website, and was co-founder and publisher of LA Alternative and the groundbreaking Frontera magazine. He was born in East LA, right here where we are, raised in Southeast LA, and learned punk rock in Hollywood. I wanted to talk to you about that, so let's give him a round of applause. Joaquin Alvarado is a media and nonprofit leader with over 20 years of experience developing innovative approaches, programs, and organizations. As founder of Studio To Be, Joaquin invests in finding and sharing stories that matter. He previously ran the Center for Investigative Reporting, prestigious investigative newsroom, one of the nation's largest journalism organizations of its kind. Joaquin also holds a bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley and an MFA from UCLA. He serves on the boards of Cityside, Consumer Reports, the James B. McClatchy Foundation, and TechSoup. And finally, we have Alma Martinez. I went in alphabetical order. Alma Martinez is last but not least, serves as a Central Valley Journalism Collaborative Executive Director. Before that, she worked in the region's public and private sector. Her professional journalism career actually started at nonprofit public radio networks, Radio Bilingue, where she focused on issues facing Latino, immigrant, and farm worker communities, including issues like healthcare, access, environmental health, education, and civic participation. Born in Mexico, Ms. Martinez immigrated with her parents to California's Central Valley at the age of 3, attending Los Banos High School and Cal State Fresno. Alma is married to Lucio Martinez, and they're proud parents of 6 children. Oh, I bow down to you. I have 2, and that's tough. All right, so to get started, I'm just going to move and sit with you all here. What efforts do you all make in your newsrooms to combat misinformation and disinformation? And how does it affect your jobs?
You want me to start?
Yeah.
You guys all look my way. Hi, everybody. So we actually, are any of you familiar with Galo News? Some of you, hopefully. So we are a local news website, and we're focused on news for Latinos, English-speaking Latinos in the greater Los Angeles area. We do translate a lot of our stories into Spanish. But one of the things that we do, and a campaign that we started, is called Stop the Dis. And I think we're going to play some videos at the end of the program. So if you want to stay and watch some of the videos we've created, about a year ago, we sat around and we thought, how are we going to improve our coverage of the election that's coming up? And we didn't want to do the usual get out the vote campaigns. And we thought, what can we do that's a little different? And at that time, we started already hearing, there was already a lot of disinformation that was happening during COVID, a lot of disinformation that was targeting Latinos, about vaccinations and about things like that. So we said, hey, let's focus on disinformation because we know that it's already happened. It happened in 2016. It happened during COVID. It's going to happen again, big time. So what we decided to do is come up with a campaign called Stop the Dis, where we worked with Al Madrigal, who actually used to work for The Daily Show. And he's currently on TV. He has a show on NBC. And we teamed up with him because we figured it would be good to have a spokesperson that can talk about disinformation in an authoritative way. And so we did a lot of videos, short videos that are online, that are on social media, with the sole purpose of trying to make sure that people understand what disinformation is, what it looks like, and how to combat it. And so some of the videos are like, if your tío shows up at the carne asada with a pack of beer and a red Trump hat and starts telling you that immigrants are stealing jobs, here's what you can say to him. And so it's trying to give people, tools and resources to be able to counter that disinformation that is happening across all of us, but especially it's happening with Latinos, and a lot of times Spanish language media is amplifying that. So that's one of the things we're doing. We're doing a few other things, but I'll pass it on to.
So they told me that I had to have the mic really close, so I'm being very conscious of that. So I follow the rules, guys. So one of the things that we do is have conversations like this, right? Community conversations about what misinformation and disinformation happens in our communities. And one particular story that we really like to point to is Stockton. Have you guys heard about Stockton? You guys know where Stockton's at? It's like way Northern California. So Stockton is just a community that was really hurt by disinformation and misinformation. So it's in essence a news desert. So the only newspaper there at the time is the Stockton Record, right? Right now, I think they have about half a dozen reporters. So what ends up happening in a community that is about 300,000 and you only have 6 reporters to cover a community of 600,000 is like, you have your phone, somebody has their phone, and guess what? They start a website, right? They start a Facebook page. So that's exactly what happened in Stockton. So the 209 Times started as, something that was, grassroots, any accident, any shooting, it happened, right? And if people don't have any other source of information, it ends up being the source of information. Right now, when it first started, people are like, it's not a big deal. Then they started doing, politicizing the web, the Facebook page. They had attacks against, political enemies that they, the authors of the page didn't like. So that really ended up targeting one of the first African-American mayor of Stockton. So he unfortunately lost his re-election campaign because of this. When it popped up, he really didn't pay attention to it, which was really, sometimes, politicians are like, let's not pay attention to the noise. However, that noise became so loud that it cost him the election. All this to say that misinformation and disinformation can really hurt our communities. And there's a direct correlation with the existence of actual objective, newsworthy news and voter participation, right? If you see something that is not good in your community, you're like, I need to vote. I need to vote. I need to make my voice heard. But if you don't have that information in a valid way, you're not able to really profess your vote. So something that we do as an organization is let folks know about these stories and have forums like this. We just held one last month, and it was a Spanish language forum, because again, our communities of color are really impacted by these issues. And we provide them tools like, how can you really fact check what you're reading, consuming it yourself, but also distributing to your family. So that's one thing that we've been really doing with the help of the James B. McClatchy Foundation, which has funded many of these forums.
So I don't run a newsroom anymore, but I am curious. The high school students are in the newspaper who are here? You guys in the newspaper? Journalism students?
The production students. Media.
Media program. Fantastic. So who's the youngest person in this room? Is anybody born in 2010? 2011?
He said dang.
Like, who's 15? Anybody 15 or younger? 16? How old are you guys? Everybody's about 17 years old. The average grandparent in America is 50 years old. First time. Like, you have your first grandbaby, you're 50. So I'm just going to add 30-ish years to your guys' lives, you high school students. Imagine the world when your grandchildren are born. It's not that far in the future. I'm 51. I'm waiting for my grandkids. I got 20 and 25-year-old. I'm like, where are they? What are we looking at, right? And when we talk about mis and disinformation, I'll give you an example. If you went to buy some potato chips and instead you got some rotten apples in there, would you keep buying those potato chips? Alexis over here is going to open a Botox studio. If you went to her studio and she shot your face full of bleach instead of Botox, would you keep going there? Who profits? Who profits? Follow the money. It's the first rule of reporting. Just follow the money. Who profits from what's going on, right? Sometimes politicians can win elections on it. Sometimes not. Sometimes like big media companies can like ride a train of something that's maybe not totally accurate or not totally true. But if you look at big technology companies, right, you can have posts on Facebook or Instagram that is this kind of stuff, which causes harm. Who's making money on it? Just ask yourself that question. Who's making money on this misinformation or disinformation or malinformation? Because they're making money on it, right? How much reporting have you guys seen on that money? Who's making the money on it? Raise your hand if you can name a single article about how much money they're making on misinformation or disinformation. So when I work with newsrooms, we can't convince people to not consume this stuff. We're not going to talk anyone out of being on Instagram or TikTok. Is anybody in here not on social media? Randy in the back. Me too, although I technically did have to sign up for Instagram, but I hid everything just for one business relationship I have. Everybody else here is on social media. Did everybody else here go on TikTok or Instagram today? They made money on you today. Did you fact check anything you saw on there? Was there any corporate accountability? Did you ask the company, are you being responsible? That's the problem.
Can I follow up on that? Because
please.
yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I've got really big here. Follow the money, and again, that is all you. If you're studying journalism, that's really going to take your career far. If everything you do, you follow that mantra. But it's not just about follow the money, as in like who's making money off of you. If you think of it bigger picture, I think that's the issue. I was at 2 conferences over the last month, Online News Association, and then I was at the INN conference in San Diego. And these are online news organizations that it's nonprofit on one side, and the other side is trying to be cutting edge and make sure that they're covering stories and news online and trying to be very modern about their coverage. And yet everything was sponsored by Microsoft and Google, and they were pushing AI. Everything was about AI, and I'm thinking, why? Why are they doing this? So it's not necessarily transactional. How much money are they making off of your click? But how much are they looking at making in society in the next 5 to 10 years? I'm a little more pessimistic about AI and super AI. I believe it's actually going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And there's something called singularity, where when that happens, technology is just going to exponentially grow in a way that we can't control. And I think what we're doing right now.
Can I just ask for a clarification though? Are you thinking The Matrix? What version are you worried about? Because that movie is good.
It's good, and I don't want to go off to, because we were just having a conversation about The Matrix. How many of you have seen The Matrix? And okay, good, that's good, because I've asked that question.
Liked it. Who didn't like The Matrix? You didn't like it? We'll come back to you.
All right, so the thing with The Matrix that gets it wrong is that The Matrix is set up to basically have human batteries, right? And that's kind of what, we don't need that. There's solar, there's nuclear. That's not gonna. But that idea of the Matrix taking over is very likely. And so I don't want to go off on the sci-fi side of it, but everything that's happening right now, people have been talking about for about 5-10 years, and it's happening faster than they were predicting. And so I think what's gonna, it's just when these large language models start kind of learning how to program themselves, which is very close, that's when things are gonna get out of control. And so one of the things I wanted to say is, all these tools for how to identify and how to see that's all going to be outdated in 6 months. We're not going to be able to tell when someone robocalls you and says, "Hi, I'm your mom, and I need you to vote this way." Or again, you've maybe some of you have heard the robocalls with Biden calling people, right? So those are the kinds of things that are going to happen where we won't be able to tell. So really, the idea is follow the money. If we know why billionaires and certain parties that are trying to use disinformation and misinformation, why are they trying to do that? That's kind of what I think is the bigger part that I'd love people to walk away with, is to start thinking about 5-10 years from now, who's going to be in charge of things, and how are we going to let them get away with it unless we can figure out how to stop it now. So
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about trends next, but since all of you have already touched on the trends, let's go to the next question, which is just kind of thinking about how has misinformation and incorrect information impacted trust in media and in news media in particular?
I'm going to start. So I think that as this issue of like fake news, I think it's really impacted what people see as news, right? They actually want to avoid news. There's actually news avoidance. And I can tell you guys that is really, for me, disheartening, because again, I feel like we need to be informed. We need to know what's happening in order to make a change in our communities. I mean, there's one of the biggest elections that's happening like in less than a month, right? And if we don't have those tools, and if we're avoiding, and I talk to I have a 24-year-old, and I'm like, okay, where do you get your news? And I would love to hear it from you guys, right? Where do you guys get your news? And he's like, well, I get my news from Reddit. I'm like, okay, so how do you confirm that what you're reading on Reddit is actually legitimate news? He's like, well, I do check. He goes, I go to the New York Times, I go to the Washington Post, just to make sure that, what I'm reading is actually true. And I guess Reddit, I'm not, Reddit savvy, but I guess there's a thumbs up, thumbs down, right? So like, he's like, I'm pretty, when it's thumbs down, I check it, right? But I don't think everybody does that, right? So I think one thing that's really important for you guys to know is that Governor Gavin Newsom actually approved legislation for there to be media literacy in the high school levels. So if you have students, if you have like smaller brothers and sisters, or you guys that are in high school, right? You guys should really, I encourage you guys to talk to your, school board, to talk to your principals, to talk to your academic, leaders on how that's getting incorporated. Because when I grew up reading the Los Banos Enterprise, right? It would come to my house. I would read the paper. I never, ever questioned what was in that paper. To me, that was solid news and I trusted it. Now, that's not the case. So I think there's more, unfortunately, we as, news leaders have to be more proactive at giving you guys the tools you guys need to be able to confront like what you're reading, because you guys are the future. You guys are going to be voting what is going to be the future of our country. So I really, really encourage you to be leaders in that realm. Like, what is happening in the high schools? How is this legislation being implemented? And what are your younger siblings or even yourselves, right? What tools are being available to you so you could know whether what you're reading is true or false?
I think it's also important, like news has always been contested. People have always fought over what is news, right? And for communities of color, the mainstream press has oftentimes been very aggressive towards our communities. I'm Mexican on my mom's side. You know, if you go back to the LA Times during World War II, has anyone heard of the Zoot Suit riots? So that was the LA Times ginning up a race riot, right? Where white US Navy service people on leave were beating up and attacking, you know, Mexican Americans in LA, right? This was like within great grandparents' generations here. If you go back a little bit in that same era, Japanese American internment, you all know about this. Look at the front pages of most major newspapers in California that were cheerleading, calling for the internment of Japanese American citizens, right? If you go into the South, right, most major newspapers in the South were pro-segregationists. So from the Civil War on, right, they were actively promoting and reporting on pro-segregationist policies. So that was the news, right? Which is also why there's been a black press in America since the late 1700s, also as a counter press. So there's always been a fight. We've always been fighting over what is actually news. I think what's different today that Alma's hitting on is how many people in here listen to public radio? Ish? What do you listen to? Public radio? But not like NPR? Not really. Okay, so we got a maybe here. Anybody else? So we need you guys right now to figure out what to do, because we up here have spent the last 20 years, more for me, arguing that we can help address the news gaps by investing in things like public broadcasting. I don't think that's correct anymore, because nobody here is listening to it, except I'm guessing you guys might be on the older end of the spectrum, not the student age. So you, in the consumer marketplace, I'm on the board of Consumer Reports. I highly recommend everyone join it. You have a lot of power. It's called your money, which is what they want. So unless we find ways to tie the kind of news that matters in your minds, in your communities, for your interests, to where you're spending your money, we're not going to get the kind of news that actually meets your needs. And it's totally disconnected right now. I'm willing to bet nobody in this room has had a conversation with Facebook, Google, Microsoft, or Apple about what kind of news matters to you. Has anybody here called them up? Does anybody in here not have an Apple iPhone? You have a Google? You have a Samsung. Did you call Samsung and tell them? Okay, so again, I go back to it. If you went to the grocery store and bought potato chips and you got rotten apples, would you keep buying that bag of chips? But that's what we're doing when it comes to our local news.
I want to echo with what Joaquin said. Going back a little bit to the newspaper era and the fact that it was millionaires back then that owned newspapers and controlled the dialogue. Now it's billionaires. And so when we talk about the New York Times or the Washington Post or even the LA Times, who controls that? Who owns it? And these are billionaires. So I'm going to kind of double down on the idea of public media, because it's not just radio. What we're doing is public media. What Alma is doing in the Central Valley, that's public media, which is not necessarily that you have to get it over the air. We use Facebook, we use Instagram, we use TikTok, we're always looking at different venues. I mean, we're talking about doing Twitch, so we're trying to stay on every possible new platform. And it's something we've always called being platform agnostic. How the message gets out there doesn't concern me, but the fact that we're creating message using public funds, using nonprofit status, basically, so that we're not beholden to billionaires. That is the future of journalism. And so when you guys are looking, I mean, this is, again, I'm being self-serving here. I've been in the for-profit journalism industry for about 30 years. I started my own newspaper and own magazine, which is kind of our way of fighting the system. And we did alternative journalism. I think that's the new alternative journalism, is nonprofit news. And it's a way to basically know that the news you're getting isn't being funded by a billionaire who, they're going to be good. They're going to do good journalism until suddenly it's about their money. And then suddenly, it switches. And I think that goes for Google, it goes for Microsoft, it goes for Apple. So I think supporting public media and looking for public media and nonprofit news, that's where you're probably going to get closest to the truth. And even there, Google is investing a lot in some of these nonprofit media, including our company. And we need to make sure that we're also pushing back on funders, because sometimes every money comes with strings. It's always the case. And again, follow the money is always going to be the mantra.
So I think one thing that we haven't talked about that maybe a lot of you guys are realizing in your own neighborhoods is like, there's not a lot of journalists out there, right? So the Fresno Bee, you know, I'm from Fresno. So there was a time that the Fresno Bee newsroom was 200 strong, right? Now it's probably 25, 30. Right. So we're never going to get to a place where, you know, those newsrooms are that big. But that doesn't mean that you guys can't make a difference in your own communities, right? Do you guys know what's happening? What's your local paper? Is there like a hyper local paper that covers your neighborhood? Is there a paper that really covers your city in a way that's, you know, that really makes a difference? You know, we always look at national news, but you know, what affects you, what affects your neighborhood, your parents, the street you live on is that local paper. So right now, what we really like, what I urge you to do so we can revive, you know, what news media is like, you know, engagement, right? How are you going to engage with that platform? And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to pay for news. But, you know, news is a business too, right? They have to survive. And the only way that we can have our communities informed is by engaging. And it's not, there's not a silver bullet. Not everyone, there's not one person that has the solution to it's a local news crisis, right? There's communities that do not have a news source. So there's a study that's through Medill University that says that like half of the counties in this country do not have a reliable news source. Can you believe it? Half of the people in this country do not know what's happening in their neighborhoods. And when that happens, like what's happening in the government? How is the city council spending their money? How is, you know, the school board? What decisions are they making that's affecting, you know, the people in those towns, right? So I really urge you guys to look into this and really be champions for, you know, the truth basically in your neighborhoods.
Can I go in a slightly different direction here? How many people have lost a grandparent? Like they passed away. I lost my grandmother here when I was 9 years old, and I would do anything to know her now, you know, like at this age, to be able to have a conversation with her and get her wisdom and tell her what happened. You know, and so many stories that I'll never know directly. I had to get it from other people to sort of form this picture, right? So I think one of the issues with AI is that it's really cool. You know, like The Matrix, y'all were not even born when it came out, maybe. It's a great film, right? But would you use a tool? Like, you will be recorded most of your lives because of social media and your phone. Would you be comfortable with your grandkids talking to a version of yourself that was built in AI? You're shaking your head no, right? Do you think this product will be available? It's coming, right? So again, it's like, if there are anybody an artist in this room? I know we got some nurses over there in the middle rows. Artists in the back. Okay, we got 1, 2. Anybody else? What's your art? So are you using AI at all in your art? So I would challenge you, if you're doing journalism, especially like if you've got a little room with a great professor or teachers, try to find those intersections where you can push the technology inside of these constraints, right? Like what's the most creative thing you could come up with, right? That actually tests out the technology. It's not going away. It's going to get much stronger. Some of it would be really weird. Some of it will seem very simple at the end of the day, but we have to challenge it and we have to create space to challenge it. So if you're artists or no artists, I would encourage them into the conversation for newsrooms.
I just wanted to go back to talking about community journalism and point out that, Julie, you and your team are doing amazing work here at Cal State LA. So are you all reading, what is the paper here?
It's called the University Times.
The University Times. You all read the University Times, right?
We're getting a little
You
bit
will.
Here. Haley's like so.
So I'd like for you all to, at least you're here today, so you're listening to us. You know, there's an interest. Maybe it's a class assignment, but go out and look at what journalism exists in this community. Look at Boyle Heights Beat. They're doing amazing work in Boyle Heights. Galo News, what we're doing. There's the East Sider. There is LA Taco. Have any of you heard of LA Taco? Okay. And even, Delos with the LA Times and LAist is doing some good work. Go out and take a look at some of that just so that you familiarize yourself. If there's anything that we can do here is at least try to make sure that you're reading some of the journalism we're talking about.
And our students, our UT Community News students, actually partner with Galo News, I'm sure you know, and Boyle Heights Beat and the East Sider LA and Delos to produce content for them, and they get course credit and they also get paid for it. So
and
they've been great partners.
you guys
Galo
have
News
done
and everyone.
amazing work with and things that we put on Instagram. A lot of videos that we're using for Instagram. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I guess I would just say that when it comes to the mainstream media, I think it's important that although there are these historical wrongs that they've done, and yes, some of them are owned by billionaires, it's also, I think, each newsroom in our local vicinity plays a role. And the journalists and the editors and the leadership at these newspapers, even if they are owned by a billionaire, and in some ways they're thankful to be owned by a billionaire because they're subsidizing the journalism that they're doing. But these journalists are very ethical, full of integrity, and are really trying to cover the communities well. And, many of them weren't even here when a century ago when the Chandlers owned the newspaper and were producing, these horrible stories. They weren't even there then. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to acknowledge that our mainstream media also play an important role, as do nonprofits. I've worked in both. I've worked at mainstream newspapers. I've worked in public radio at WAMU, worked at the nonprofit sector, the Center for Public Integrity and Better Government Association and others. And I think what really needs to happen is a lot of newsrooms need to come together and support each other and not be so divisive, because there is public funding available. There is money. Google and Meta and all of these bigger corporations are stealing content from newsrooms, taking it and profiting off of it and not paying the newsrooms. And legislators as of late have tried to force these companies to basically give a share of that profit that they're making to newsrooms, but it didn't work because they have such powerful lobbyists. So we can be equally powerful lobbyists if we just unite as journalists and as newsrooms, instead of, fighting over, nonprofit is better, ethnic is better, or mainstream is better. Really, we need to get together and create our own lobbying group. And we need to fight those Googles and those Metas of the world that are taking our news content that people work hard, including my students, to generate. They're working hard to create this content. Why should Google feed it into their AI bot?
Yeah, and Latino Media Collaborative, that is basically our parent company, is an advocate for that, and they actually did work with. They were trying to pass that legislation, which didn't pass because Governor Newsom vetoed it because he wanted that Google money. So
He didn't actually veto it, though, to be technical for a second. But just to riff also, did anybody here driving a car here? Did anybody here not wear a seatbelt when they were in a car? You didn't wear your seatbelt? Okay. Anybody in a car that had a seatbelt who did not wear it? So there was a time in this country where it was controversial to say cars must have seatbelts, right? And I'm going to come back to Consumer Reports, which everyone should sign up for. We had to fight for that. That was a policy decision. We had to enforce a law basically saying cars must have seatbelts, right? Then there was a law when I was a kid that passed in California saying you must wear your seatbelt. Again, people argued about this. People didn't want a law saying you must wear your seatbelt, right? But we had to get it in place. And at the time when seatbelts got put into cars, the auto industry was the strongest industry in America by far, right? So that was consumers understanding the safety issues with seatbelts, because you would fly out of your car with no seatbelt, right? Go through the windshield in order to get it in place, right? So there's a spectrum on are the tech companies stealing content? Are we giving it to them? There's a whole spectrum there. But we could really ask, and we won't be done with the fight. You guys will have to finish this fight. What's the right policy for managing technology companies when it comes to information? That's a question. It's not answered yet.
I'm sorry. It's been answered in Europe and Canada and Australia, and we try to do similar here in California. And you're right, it wasn't vetoed. Basically, the governor worked behind the scenes to make sure it did, to create a deal. But anyway.
Behind closed doors, to be accurate.
So we actually did have a public comment as an organization in response to that. So if I'm happy to share it with you guys because we didn't agree with how it was done. We felt that a lot of news organizations got left behind, and I think that you hit the nail on the head as a secret sauce. So like I told you guys that the Fresno Bee at one time was 200 newsroom strong. Now it's around 25. But collaboration is key, and that's what we're doing. So what we do is when we produce news. So we have a newsroom. Every time we produce a story, it goes out to all of our news partners, so they're able to use it. So let's say like you're a mom and pop, and you have your own paper, and you're able to do maybe like 2 stories, but we're able to give you more content for your local audience. So that's and we provide it for free. It's not behind a paywall, and we don't expect them to put it behind a paywall because we want it to be read. So that's one thing we do. We also fund newsrooms. So we fund newsroom positions to be able to, again, augment the news ecosystem. And that's the way to do it. We have to figure out, kind of like on your budget, right? Sometimes you have less money and you got to do a lot more with a lot less, right? Like at the end of the month, you're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to stretch these dollars? So that's what we're doing, right? What can we do to really think innovatively with what we're producing and make sure that there's more news to go around? So.
Yeah, that's great. And it's not a normal product like a car or candy, right? News is a public good. And so just like our libraries and our schools and our roads, we should support that good information because it bolsters our democracy. And I guess that leads me to the next question. What are the implications of all of this on our democracy? I mean, just thinking about the engagement we were talking about earlier, how informed people are. How does this affect our country and our democracy?
So have you guys read The Atlantic? Like I'm like a super like a Atlantic nerd. So I read a story, actually last night, and it was talking about like this moment that we're in misinformation and disinformation, and how like really, and that picture, the puppy picture came up, right? So a legislator kind of like put it up viral, and even though she knew it wasn't true, she's like, I'm just going to put it out there. So again, the implications to what is happening where people deliberately know that they're spreading these lies, it's a reality. Like we had a forum last month, and one of our partners, Fact Chequeado, it's basically fact checking for Latinos, right? They were saying that on TikTok, there was a viral post that was going out to Latin American countries, like come to the US border, like you're going to get a green card and you're going to be able to get a job right when you get to the border. It wasn't true, right? But it was really, it had over 2 million views. So Fact Chequeado had to put out an advisory saying this is not true. So again, I think we really have to be conscientious about that fact, where it's coming from, and be conscious about when we spread it, right? So it definitely has political implications and how it affects our democratic discourse.
Also, I mean, how many people are planning to vote here?
How many are registered?
So, and I'm assuming everybody else who's not 18, are you planning to register? I mean, at the end of the day, where do you want to live? Like you're in LA right now, right? Where's this high school at? Where's your guys' high school? South Central. This is the most diverse place in the history of the world, period. Do we think we can govern ourselves or not? Like, a lot of people would rather people not vote, right? There's a lot of voter suppression in this country right now. It's like we're going in reverse in many states. So my feeling is that all you have to do is wear people down. You just wear them down, and then they disengage, they get distracted, and then they can be taken advantage of. And it's like you have to have a certain amount of spirit. You have to have a certain amount of fight in you. Otherwise, people with power, and this is not any one side of the political realm, people with power will take advantage of people without power. That's how it works. So if you want to get run, you want to get played, don't pay attention, right? And if you're spending like how many hours a day is spent in and around your screen, in and with your technology, is that building power for you or taking power? Or neutral? Yeah, go ahead. Why? Can we get a microphone over here? Come on up. You're on the panel now. Come on. What's your name? I expect to see at least 5 other people get up here too. You nurses, future nurses of America, you're coming up here.
My name is Braxton Jordan. I wanted to say that, it's taking away from the energy that we could be putting into more like beneficial things. Like as a high school student, the youth, we really need to be paying attention to these elections, these voting things, because that's our community. That's stuff that is, how do I say? Oh my God, affecting us directly. Like I was just on KBLA radio and LA Times speaking about how youth needs to vote. Like they need to get involved with this stuff because we are the next generation. We're going to be taking care of our world after you guys. And LA Times, I was talking about how this program BSAP is being recited as, oh, Black students don't need that. But I was just saying that it's important that youth needs to be involved with these things because we're important. And the more that youth becomes involved with this, the more other people will see and be like, oh, I need to get involved with that too. Like, it's not something that we need to be getting into once we're 18. There's something that we need to be getting into when we're 14. So we can understand and not be like, oh, like, what is all this political stuff? Like, most students aren't interested in that, which makes sense. It's a bunch of boring, not to offend nobody, boring old people talking about stuff. We don't know what we're talking. We don't know what you guys are talking about. But if we see like more younger people like talking about this stuff, we're like, oh.
When do you turn old? Where's the old line? Where's the old? So I totally agree. I'm gonna give her a round of applause.
Thank you. And this is a nice segue into the Q&A. Although I will ask for one more question, one more answer for you guys. What can people do? So what, we're barraged with information online, on social media. What can we do to combat misinformation? What can people do to get good sources of information? And what can they do if they want to be involved? You've convinced them. So
my one piece of advice is the people who run the world read. They read.
Yep.
So I don't care what you're reading. The people who are running things are reading. So you can read whatever you want, from romance novels to policy papers. Read as much as you can. Because whatever happens with technology, whatever happens politically, once you have that knowledge set, it can never be taken away from you, ever. It will give you more skills and it will build power. So I would also recommend you start reading Consumer Reports. You should definitely start reading local news, but I don't care what it is. If you're a reader, you will have the ability to think critically and you'll be able to tell what's BS and what's not. I mean, it's that simple. It's like, who's trying to BS you and why? Are they trying to get over on you? The ability to think critically comes from reading.
So I think I would say yes, read, but question what you read, right? Like add another source. Like, okay, if you read something on Biden, right? Read something on Trump, right? On the same topic. Maybe it's tariffs, maybe it's immigration. Like compare, right? And always ask questions. And I think that for me, to tell you the truth, so I'm an English language learner. How many of you guys speak Spanish or a second language? So the way that I learned English and that I advanced my vocabulary, believe it or not, was reading the newspaper. Really my writing advanced so much by reading the paper. So I really encourage, I really echo what Joaquin said, but ask questions, right? And compare sources. I'm telling you guys, I was so impressed about my son, right? Like he said, okay, I check it. I'm not sure if I believe it, but I look for a second source. So that's one thing that I really encourage you to do.
Yeah, and I want to bring it back to the misinformation and disinformation issue. The reason that so many powerful entities are trying to use disinformation to confuse people is basically they're trying to wear us down and they're trying to wear the youth down. Why is this happening now? Because we know that people in power are starting to lose that power because demographics are shifting, which means that young people are starting to vote. And so there's one thing that I think that I got from you is it is important for the youth to stay motivated and to stay engaged, because if you guys lose if you lose your will to fight because you're confused by disinformation, they won the battle. So make sure you stay in it, because old people like us are looking to you guys
Watch it with the
to.
old thing over
I pointed right, but you're 2 years younger than me, so you're in that.
Oh man.
But
there. These are future grandparents of America.
you guys are going to save the day, and I really mean that. I think you guys, it's this next generation.
Or maybe not. They could blow it.
No.
So stay engaged.
We're hopeful. We're hopeful.
I don't know. I'm 50-50.
I never watched The Matrix, so I'm thinking like I'm saying.
I think he's
Keeping
the red
it real.
pill on the Google. I don't know.
I've never seen the Matrix over here. Okay.
Oh, you got to see it. You got to see it. I agree with that point. All right. Well, let's move into the question and answers. I know we have a room full of extremely bright Cal State LA students here, I hope, and faculty and staff as well. So, what questions do you have for the panelists or comments for us?
Where do they come up? Are they going to get a mic?
Yeah. Why don't we?
Oh, yeah, Randy's got the mic. Give it up for Randy, everybody. Her husband built SoFi Stadium. You guys know SoFi Stadium? That's her husband's. That's kind of misinformation. He did the facades. Can we call on some people? Oh, you got questions? You just stood up like you have a question.
Come on, go Don.
Is there anything that you've seen that has really shocked you, or that like your parents have asked you if this is true, or any misinformation shockers?
A lot of families, like in the Black community especially,
They don't like voting. They don't like talking about politics. Like, it's kind of like taboo. So like, how do us as the youth like influence and like try to convince them that their vote matters, their voice matters?
What have you tried so far?
I mean, it's like scary trying to talk to them. I'm like, hey, you voting? And they're like, I wasn't expecting you to ask me that. And I'm like, no, yeah, no. And then they just walk away. I'm like, oh, okay.
It's hard. You have to actually be knowledgeable and to know what all these propositions are. Because we talk about voting in this kind of high level. Go out and vote. All right. How many of you have looked at your ballot? Okay. I sat down with my mother, who is 86, and I said, okay, let's take a look at the propositions and let's go through one by one, and I'll give you the pros and the cons. We got through the first one, and she was pro when I read the pro side, and then she switched to the con when I read the con side. And then that was it. She's like, you vote for me. It's hard. It is hard, but it's important. And so I think that's a conversation that maybe if you're ask about what are issues that are important to the older generation. Maybe if you touch on certain items or certain things that might interest them, or maybe you can kind of pull their heartstrings and say, what kind of world do you want to leave behind for me or or your grandkids? So maybe pull that and see if that gets them a little bit more engaged. But I think you need to keep doing that, because I think that's going to hopefully get them out there.
I'm trying.
Good job.
And I think making it a family activity. So like in my family right now we have 4 people voting. My 18-year-old just registered to vote. So my husband, my 24-year-old and my 18. Like we get together, we get our ballots, and we like go through it, and we debate like, oh well, I agree with this, oh I don't agree with that. So it really becomes like a family thing, and it kind of becomes a tradition in a way, right? So I think you can set that new culture, right? Like start that dialogue.
And there's voter guides that you guys put out a voter guide, right? You guys are working on, yeah. So there's University Times has one, KPCC has, Cal Matters has. So go out there and look at some of the media we're talking about and see what their voter guides look like, and look at and use it as a launching pad.
And the Easy Voter Guide too. The Easy Voter Guide is available statewide, and that one's a really great one too. So there's a lot of tools.
Let me take another angle though, just to be provocative. We take a lot for granted. Like, how old are your parents? Can I ask? Right. So like that's around my age. Like we're talking about like the civil rights movement was like 60 years ago, right? Cesar Chavez, like I've spoken to a lot of like Latino students who really don't know anything about Cesar Chavez, don't really care, honestly. Like it's not in their frame of reference. So a lot of times we like to beat people over the head, like you got to do this, you got to do that, right? Without really reflecting where people are at right now, you know? And so again, I do think people follow what their kids are doing. Like if you show that you care, it wakes people up, right? But I do think that we got to find new heroes in this story. It's like, what are we fighting for, right? Or what are people not willing to fight for? That's another question. Like, what are you willing to lose? What are you willing to lose, right? If you care about reproductive rights, there's a lot that's been lost in the last couple of years, right? And again, not politicizing this, but there's a lot more you could lose, right? Like if gay marriage gets kicked back to the States, right, you're going to have gay marriages outlawed. Like I have family members who would be impacted in other states if that were to happen, right? So we can lose things. It's not about like holding the line or like nothing's going to change. We can go in reverse, right? And what's the price we're going to pay if we go in reverse? You have African American voters right now in multiple states who have to work harder to actually cast their vote. If you're in Georgia, you're not allowed to receive a bottle of water if you have to stand in line for 8 hours, right? Because they closed down polling places. Are we cool with that? What else? You want to pay a tax when you have to go vote? I met people in Mississippi who used to have to pay a poll tax and pass a like 200-word test or question test in order to vote. Like we could go back there. Those days aren't that far away.
Okay, it sounds like we have a question in the audience.
In the Matrix.
Online.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question from the webinar. How do I know the media is or isn't biased to us viewers? More clearly to influence us to vote for this person? I don't know how to explain it.
So I would always say if you watch one channel of news, whether it's online, radio, television, social media, get another one. Always just have multiple sources. And I would go back to follow the money, right? It's like, who's paying for this thing to happen, right? Like a large news organization typically makes money by advertising, and there's rules around, the firewall. Not every site is that, right? You have a lot of sites that present as news that are actually totally political and funded by political interests. So I'd follow the money.
And I would say to look at, so for our website, so we're a member of the Institute, the Nonprofit News Institute, INN, right? So if you go to our website, you'll see the reporters, like you're able to actually like email our reporters, right? If you have an issue with one of the stories, so that's a way you can do it. And look at who's the funders, right? So for nonprofit news, all of our funders are listed, right? There's like a code of journalism ethics that we have to abide by. So I really encourage you, scroll down to the bottom, scroll that to About Us. Like, where are they? Can you get a hold of the editor? Can you get a hold of the reporters? Who is funding them? And look at other news organizations that are doing the same thing in that community. Compare and contrast. So and don't be so open to. So let me tell you. So I drive all the time up and down the 99, and this big billboard came up with Epoch Times. I'm like, Epoch Times. I'm like. And it said, reliable journalism in your community, Epoch Times. And I'm like, I've been in journalism for a long time. I don't know who these people are. So I went to their website, scrolled all the way to the bottom. Turns out they're from China. And they have newsrooms all over the world. So again, you really have to look at who, like, follow the money, follow the information on the site.
I just wanted to add on the Epoch Times piece. We actually did a story. We did an investigative story. We worked with a team from USC, and we dug into Epoch Times because we started seeing billboards that were in Spanish. Yes. And again, it's that same, Epoch Times number, you guys have all seen it, right? Epoch Times. They were actually delivering to homes. I lived in South Pasadena for a while, and they would actually deliver them free. And it looks like a real newspaper. It reads, but once you get in and you look at it, it is 100% pro-Trump. It's 100% anti-China. It's actually owned by the Falun Gong. It's a cult in China that the Chinese government, was repressing and pushing them down. But so they're very pro, right-wing, anyhow, they're trying to influence. They were putting out YouTube information in Spanish that was disinformation. And so on our site, we actually did an investigative piece. So I'm glad that you looked that up. But back to the online question, I would go back to follow, go and look at nonprofit news, I think is going to be probably where I would say to start. Even the New York Times now has kind of swung a little bit, because what happened is the spectrum of right and left has kind of shifted. And so what we used to say, like the New York Times is liberal, well, because they don't want to seem liberal, sometimes they play a little bit too much and try to give the right too much. And so that pendulum is kind of swung. So I wouldn't even trust some of those the Washington Post. Do you know who owns the Washington Post? Jeff Bezos. So we always point to them as like, oh, a bastion of journalism. He's not a bad guy, kind of. I don't know. Is he? Anyway, nonprofit news is where I would really go to. ProPublica is one nationwide. Cal Matters. And again, locally, look up Galo News. Again, I'm shameless plug there.
And just so everyone knows, places like the New York Times, regardless of where their editorial board stands, their journalists are basically, I think you mentioned a firewall. There's a church, it's called the church-state divide, where they are not allowed to be influenced at all by who owns them, by the advertising. It's in their code of ethics as well. And if they do violate any of these things, there's multiple stories written about it, and it's on TV and it's all over the place because they have so much scrutiny on them. And that's the way it should be.
It's editorial firewall.
Editorial firewall, church-state wall,
yeah.
whatever you want to call it. Basically, it is something that ensures that their reporting is credible and that they've reached out to all sides. They could also be sued for having incorrect information. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the reporters there are doing their best. Now, do they get things wrong? Yes. But when they get things wrong, there's multiple stories written about it, which is a good thing because there needs to be watchdogs on the watchdogs as well, right?
And there's story corrections too after I don't know if you, like when you scroll to the bottom, it was incorrectly said, and there are corrections. But I guess if there's one thing that I would like to have you guys remember is don't take things at face value. Like if you see Epoch Times, and it says real journalism, make sure that you are really fact checking if that's true and knowing who they are.
Any other questions? No more questions? Nothing from the webinar? All right, then. I'm going to call Sasha up here to conclude the event. Thank you so much to our panelists. Let's give them a big round of applause. Audience for the questions, the comments, engaging in the activity. Thank you for being
here. Before I have one question for the panel. I'm curious about news fatigue. We talked about that in the beginning about getting worn down. And I know that for myself, that's one of the things that's really hard is that there's so much news is so disturbing. And you don't know if you have it in you to just kind of keep reading and digesting. So if you have any tips for our audience of how to overcome news fatigue.
Take a break, and sometimes things are funny. I'm sorry, like Donald Trump dancing around for 30 minutes. I'm like, okay, that's real goofy. It's okay to have a sense of humor out there and to take a break because it is really a grind, and there's so much money to be made in your eyeballs. Right? That they will just keep feeding you content nonstop. So stepping away, I think, has enormous benefits.
I would say diversify your reading, right? If you have read too much Gaza, too much Israel, too much Trump, too much Harris, go to positive news. There's a lot of positive. There's you can look at history, you can look at science reporting, you can look at healthcare reporting. I mean, diversify your reading, and I think that balances. And I'm always a cup half full, so I'm always on the positive side. There's always something positive to read, guys. So just dig a little deeper.
Okay, I'm getting your number.
And this may be unpopular, but Sundays are for football for me, so I follow my fantasy football league, and that's how I stay sane.
Awesome. Well, great. And I do want to just go back to something that the panel brought up about voting. As you know, the civic engagement is part of the Pat Brown Institute mission. So I'm going to just plug that a little bit more. Something that you should know is that you do not have to fill out every single thing on the ballot. It's not like a test where you're going to get graded. You can vote for if you only want to vote for the presidential candidate at the top of the ticket, great, just do that. If there's a ballot measure that you really care about and you just want to vote for that, just do that. You do not have to know everything. And I think that's something that is really important, especially when you're just learning and starting to get engaged and knowledgeable. There's so many issues. And just a plug for voting. If you're eligible to vote, there's a ballot measure about minimum wage and raising the minimum wage, which I think probably would affect a lot of us in this room. So, maybe that's just worth getting out there to vote for. And, as Joaquin said, we're not that far away from these rights that we've gained. And the law only works for us if we make it work for us. So this has been so interesting. I just want to share a couple of things from the panel that I heard, just to echo what they said. Ask questions, go to multiple sources, follow the money, consider looking at community journalism, consumer reports, and the seatbelt story. I think that's really an interesting way that we can see how policy does matter and does actually make changes. And news is a public good, so keep demanding that you get your good news and read, and I'll put an asterisk on that. I'm a very slow reader, so I love to listen. And that is one of the cool things about AI, is that almost anything is listenable at this point. So you probably have a commute, you probably have dishes to do, laundry to do. That's when I get a lot of my news. And there's also a cool thing where you can speed it up. So if you're impatient, you don't have to listen it at real time. You can triple time it. So anyway, that's a few of my plugs. Let's give another round of applause to our speakers. I also want to give a shout out to the Pat Brown Institute staff, to Randy Aho, our program director, and Tatiana Fernandez, our associate director, and also Marla and her team for doing the media today. Thank you.
How about these high school students one more time, too?
Oh my God, the high school students, yes. We want you to come back to the Pat Brown Institute.
And the future nurses of America.
Yes,
you guys were quiet.
So come to more of our events. We have 4 more events in our series. This week we have an online panel about housing. It's called Housing as a Human Right, a Call to Action. So that is going to be really great. We have some great panelists. Next week we have Voter Fest, and that's from 10 to 2 on campus. We're having free smash burgers, like a food truck is going to be there, so get there early, and there'll be lots of cool things to do, games and crafts, and then there's also people that will have information about voting, voter registration, and kind of debunking your ballot or decoding it. And yeah, we're so happy that you came out today. And last thing, just thank you so much, and remember to vote and register to vote. Thanks so much.